We're going to talk about Perry Mason, Doc Savage, and King Kong. Each of those uh, stories, which are still on television and in print today, premiered in March 1933. Now, an awful lot was going on in the world in March 1933. I'm just talking about this entertainment, which I have been reading, rereading, viewing, reviewing since May 1966. Now, I hope I live long enough to March 2023, the 100th anniversary of these stories, but may not. We'll see. Now, there's King Kong, which the first draft of the screenplay was written by Edgar Wallace alone. He's talking with the producer about the second draft when Edgar Wallace dies. This was the last thing he worked on was King Kong. Perry Mason had been writing for 12 years, being published, before he created Perry Mason. Before Erle Stanley Gardner created Perry Mason. And Lester Dent wrote for Street and Smith Publications under the name that Street and Smith owned, Kenneth Robeson. So, 1933, King Kong. And its first showing for the public was March 2nd, 1933, in New York City. Now, because Edgar Wallace died, the producer, Marion C. Cooper, finished the second draft. So it famously starred Fay Wray, had the most fantastic cinematography and special effects for the era. Doc Savage came along just a little bit later in the month. Doc Savage magazine, however, it had an entire novel in there for 10 cents. 75,000 word novel, later 60,000 words due to paper shortages. The Man of Bronze. Now, the way this was written was also collaborative, but this collaboration was intentional. They provided, Street and Smith provided Lester Dent with an outline. So this is what we want. These are adventure stories. And so taking that, Dent was already a very successful pulp author. And the editor, there were two editors. The overall editor for Street and Smith magazines that had stories in them was Henry W. Ralston, whose idea Doc Savage was. And then his right-hand man, who actually wrote the first Doc Savage, the model for Lester Dent, outline, but he wrote a complete novella, basically. And thereafter, every magazine, they'd ask Lester Dent to give him an outline for the next one. So he would think up an outline, write the outline, send it to Ralston. Ralston would read it, send it to Nanovic. Then they would check with the business manager of Street and Smith. And so let's say they the business manager said, "Hey, I bought this terrific artwork for Chinatown. You need to set at least one key scene in Chinatown so you can put that on the cover." And that's what they do. I mean, whatever he came up with. He'd say, the business manager would say, "We're underperforming in Philadelphia. We need one set in Philadelphia." So that's what they do. It's a business. So then the first Perry Mason, Case of the Velvet Claws. So, Man of Bronze, Case of Velvet Claws, King Kong, all debuted. That's quite a month for entertainment, March 1933. Now, I read a whole biography of Edgar Wallace, fascinating character, and he wrote King Kong. His idea, he had to sell the idea, and Cooper loved it. And then when the movie came out, there was already a novelization. This was pretty common at the time when it was for decades. Major motion picture comes out, there's going to be a novelization of it. In fact, I saw the novelization of Star Wars in 1976, and this is months before the movie comes out in 77. So, Philip Jose Farmer wrote a book about Doc Savage. In fact, I got it right here. So it gives his life, so to speak. It's a biography of a fictional character, but comes where talks about some of the gadgets and locations in this Doc Savage fiction. Doc Savage owns the Empire State Building. He also has a secret fortress of solitude at basically the North Pole. The Superman comic books just stole that from Doc Savage. Anyway, great stuff if you like pulp fiction adventure, which I do. Now, there's a couple of books about Erle Stanley Gardner and how he wrote Perry Mason, Fugate, and Davidson. So it was all plot. Erle Stanley Gardner said that he started each by making two outlines. First outline, standalone story where the murderer gets away with the killing and a wrongly accused innocent is executed for the crime. And then second outline has Perry Mason, Del Street, Paul Drake in the story, and they win. Mason or Gardner, the author, loved making the first outline, killer gets away with it, and the second outline with the continuing characters. Just another trial to them. It's the biggest deal in the life of the innocent who would be executed without him. Yes, Stephen King does an outline and writes he does an outline in his book on memoir, but Joseph Heller, Kurt Vonnegut, J.K. Rowling, many others, successful authors, Dan Brown, they outline. So that's all I say there, but I'll mention a typical Mason story by Erle Stanley Gardner. Okay, you see, it's published in hardback in August 1961. I can't remember the exact dates, but it was published across 9 weeks before this in the Saturday Evening Post as a serial that year, August 1961. I think it finished in July, and then they were preparing it for publication as a hardback the next month, and they did. And then they published it as a paperback a couple of years later. So he has the regulars and both the uh, the defense team and the prosecutor. Bragg is a brilliant homicide detective, a real challenge for Perry Mason in the novels, much more than in the television series. And then there's the standalone characters. It's a standalone story for them. And Case of the Biggest Spout. It became one of the most celebrated TV episodes in 1963. And in this one, he even kind of plugs Saturday Evening Post in the story. So he wrote, Gardner wrote 82, I think, Perry Mason novels. At the same time, he wrote 40 others. So he wrote over 120 novels, full, complete novels, published in this fashion. 16 of the Perry Mason novels were published as a serial in the Saturday Evening Post. There were some published in other magazines, but the Saturday Evening Post was number one. It was the biggest payer. It paid the most and had the biggest circulation. Yeah. This is about Perry Mason in the Saturday Evening Post. Saturday Evening Post archive. And there would be illustrations in the magazine. Anyway, they had a big impact on my life. This fiction that I liked: Perry Mason, Doc Savage, and King Kong. And I've talked, almost 15 minutes about this, and I could go into much more detail, and I may do that about each of the writers: Edgar Wallace, Lester Dent, and Erle Stanley Gardner. Like Erle Stanley Gardner, I became a lawyer and then a best-selling author. So no doubt that they had an influence on me.